Hello everyone, a very good evening to all of you. Welcome to this session of UPSC Environment and Ecology. All right, so we are continuing with the Environment and Ecology lecture on for UPSC Cse exam. We have completed about 12 lectures so far, and a predominant portion has been already completed. So today we are going to look at another topic that basically deals with some of the initiatives from Government of India as well as international picture, okay, regarding conservation of environment and ecology. So we'll be broadly looking into some initiatives in this regard. Okay, so that is the aim of today's chapter. Not so big chapter. Mostly these are very much derivative from the government laws and rules and regulations. So I'll be showing you some of the criteria, for example, some criteria, etc. will be shown, but we are not going into deep regarding all that because that's all part of a law. If you want to check it out, I will upload this slide in the Telegram channel. You can read through them, or you can simply go to the government websites and read there. It's basically copy pasted as such. There's nothing more. Okay, so anyway, let's start today's lecture. Once again, I welcome all of you to this channel. Please make sure you subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share with your friends. Okay, so the target chapter is Protected Area Network, PAN. All right. So there are plenty of national initiatives as well as international initiatives for protection of environment and ecology. Okay, so starting with some national initiatives. What exactly are protected areas? Or what are the initiatives taken by the Government of India as statutory laws or say some notifications in order to protect certain areas of environment and ecology? The first thing that comes to your mind is the adoption of a national policy for wildlife conservation. This was the first major step. This happened in 1970, and a couple of years later, Wildlife Protection Act was passed in 1972. And since then, India has been witnessing a lot of specific projects targeted at protecting the environment or maybe a species individually. For example, Project Tiger, Project Elephant, Crocodile Breeding and Management Program. So each of these projects are targeted to protect a specific species. There has been other projects also which cater to the conservation of the entire environment and ecosystem. Okay, so the first thing that comes to your mind when we talk about protected areas as far as environment and ecology is concerned is basically wildlife sanctuary and national park. Correct? So what exactly is a wildlife sanctuary? What is a national park and how do they differ, or are they the same? Okay, so what is the difference between these two? Exactly, to start with, what are wildlife sanctuaries and what are national parks? Basically, both of them are associated with the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Okay, this is the crux. And this provided for some declaration of certain areas by the state government, okay, as wildlife sanctuaries, if the area was thought to be of adequate ecological, geomorphological, or natural significance. So if the area is thought to be having some ecological or say geomorphological or some natural significance, then the state government could declare that area, assuming that area is in that particular state, as a wildlife protection area, as a wildlife sanctuary, according to the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. National Park also same, comes again under the Act of 1972. Again, state government has the power to declare the same. Okay, and this, within the law, within this statute, there is no clear difference between national park and wildlife sanctuary. It does not specify what exactly constitutes a national park and what exactly constitutes a wildlife sanctuary. The difference is not specified. Although individual definitions are there, it's not specified what's the difference. But to our understanding and to whatever has been going on in the country, national parks enjoy a greater degree of protection compared to sanctuaries. Okay, certain activities which are only limited or say regulated inside a sanctuary are actually completely banned in a national park. Okay, some minor activities are allowed within a sanctuary. But even those are not allowed in national parks. National parks are having a higher degree of protection. Wildlife sanctuaries, can be associated with a particular species. Say, for example, we have, say, Periyar Wildlife Sanctuary in Kerala that is associated with the protection of tiger. There are plenty of sanctuaries here, and Kaziranga is a national park, but there are plenty of sanctuaries which are associated with protection of a particular species. But national park is not like that. It is not primarily focused on a particular species. It is the entire thing, the ecology as such. Okay, not pointing to a particular species or anything. So this is the main difference. It enjoys more degree of protection, and it is not concerned with any particular species. It's concerned with nature as such. Okay, so this is the prime difference between a national park and a wildlife sanctuary. It's not just the state government, even central government can, sometimes declare wildlife sanctuaries and national park under certain conditions, especially when they, these parks are, multi-stage things. Okay, say for example, if that entire area does not lie within one state, then obviously it's up to the central government, not to the state. The states will have to give their concerns and all, but still, the central government could also come up with declarations regarding wildlife sanctuary and national parks. Okay, so how does this work, or what is the procedure in order to declare an area as a wildlife sanctuary or a national park? There are two notifications: initial notification and final notification. So in the initial notification, the state government has to declare their intention to constitute a particular area, say around a forest or something, as a sanctuary or a national park. If it, if it satisfies some, say, adequate criteria, for example, ecological, geomorphological, or natural significance. Okay, if some such criteria are satisfied, the state government, through a notification, can declare its intention to constitute that area as a sanctuary or a national park. Clear? So this is the initial notification. Then comes the final notification after some time. So when the initial notification is issued, there is a limited time period in which some claims etc. can be brought up. Say for example, if the government is saying that such and such area are henceforth going to be national parks. Earlier I told you a lot of activities inside the national parks are completely banned. Similarly, in wildlife sanctuaries, a lot of activities are highly regulated. Correct. So state government cannot just say that tomorrow onwards these are going to be national parks, so everybody inside that area get out. They can't just say that, correct? So there is a time gap in which the people who are living there or who are dependent on these areas for their livelihood could come up with their own claims in front of the state government. So the state government has to take in their considerations while notifying these areas. Okay, so after all these claims have been made and all, finally after that time has elapsed, the state government can issue a notification specifying that this area became a sanctuary or a national park. Okay, so this is the procedure. Now, sometimes, as I have mentioned earlier, it is declared by the central government also. Central government, if it is satisfied that an area is of adequate ecological, geomorphological, I read it as national, but it is natural. Okay, natural or geological significance for any purpose of protecting, propagating, or developing wildlife or environment, declare it as a sanctuary or a national park. Same. Basically, both state government and central government can do that, but most often it is the state government who has the authority. Okay. Now, when this is, this notification is made, what are the boundaries? Okay, what are the boundaries of this area? The notification shall specify as nearly as possible the situation and limits of such area. It has to be very clear. Okay, you can't roughly say that it goes through there and there. No. It is as nearly as possible the area of such importance is specified in the notification. And sometimes, these areas may go into water bodies, especially in the territorial ocean and all. Okay, consider a marine national park or a marine sanctuary associated with the immediate coastal area. Then some area of that national park or sanctuary is overlapping an ocean. Ocean doesn't come exactly under the entire control of state government. So in such conditions, you also need the permission from Chief Naval Hydrographer of the central government. So he is also consulted while specifying a national park or a sanctuary if it covers a region of the territorial waters. Okay, at that time, the needs of the local fishermen, etc., also has to be taken into concern. You can't just simply say that this is a national park or wildlife sanctuary and tomorrow onwards you cannot fish here. Because these people live or make their livelihood from ocean. Correct. So if regulations are going to be imposed, then the local community also has to be heard. Correct. Now, once this area is set as a national park or a wildlife sanctuary, then no alteration can be made except on the recommendation of National Board for Wildlife. Okay, state government can fix an area as such, as a national park or sanctuary. But once it is done, once that final notification is made, no alteration of its boundaries can be made without the permission of National Board for Wildlife. And later on, an amendment was made in 1991 for the inclusion of territorial waters in areas to be declared as sanctuaries for the protection of offshore marine flora and fauna. Earlier, I told you that in certain cases, some territorial waters or ocean part also might, come inside a national park or a sanctuary. This was made possible through an Amendment Act in 1991. I hope you know around 12 nautical miles from the coastal area of every country, that portion of the ocean is known as territorial water. And in the territorial water, the final jurisdiction is for that country. Okay, so for India, consider the water surrounding India, 12 nautical miles from its coast is basically India. It's India's only. Its territorial waters. Okay. Now, I mentioned earlier that after the initial notification, the people has to be heard. The local community has to be heard before making the final notification. Correct. So assume that some people has come up with some claims. Okay, my house is here. My ancestors has been living here for ages. Or say we are tribal people. We are we live based on, we make a livelihood from the forest by collecting the minor forest produce, etc., etc. So these are all genuine claims. You can't just forget them or you can't just put them aside. Correct? So how do you actually settle these rights? So the state government shall make alternative arrangements required for making available fuel, fodder, and other forest produce to the persons affected. Okay, so if the government is going to bring up a strict ban, then it is up to the government to make sure that there are alternate methods for the people to continue their daily routine. Okay, so government should make sure that they have proper rehabilitation. The state government, for this purpose, appoints an officer named as a collector under this act to inquire into and determine the existence, nature, and extent of rights of any person in or over the land comprised within the sanctuary or national park which is to be notified. So it is the duty of this personnel termed as the collector in order to look into these matters and arrive at a amicable a proper statistics and data. And after the issue of a notification for declaration, no right shall be acquired on or over the land comprised within the limits of the area specified in such notification, except by succession, testamentary, or in the state. So once all these claims has been made after that initial notification, and finally once that final notification is made, afterwards no one can come up with new claims. No more claims are allowed in that, except in cases of succession. Say for example, father to son, that will go on. Okay, because there it's ancestral property, so that claim is still possible, testamentary and or intestate. Only these claims are allowed. Nobody can say that, come up with a new claim all of a sudden from, a completely outside area. Now, how do you claim these rights? I told you how, these kinds of claims are made, and I told you how the government settles these claims. But how can you, or I mean, what is the procedure of making these claims? Or what happens when these claims are made? In case of a claim to a right in or over any land referred to, the collector shall pass an order admitting or rejecting the same in whole or in part. So it is up to the collector. He or she can pass an order saying that, okay, this claim is valid, or say this claim is invalid, or part of this claim is valid and partly it is invalid. Okay, so it is up to that person, that officer. And once that claim is admitted in whole or in part, however it is, then the collector has to do the following. Okay, all these are parts of the act. That is why I am reading as such. Okay, it's given in that act itself, the same terminology, same wordings. Okay, so it's not possible to skip or anything. So the collector may either exclude such land from the limits of the proposed sanctuary. Okay, so collector can say that this land is now excluded from the sanctuary. I mean, the claims made to that land is valid, and that land is excluded from the sanctuary or the national park. That is one possibility. Or proceed to acquire such land or rights, except where an agreement between the owner of such land or holder of rights and the government, the owner or the holder of such rights has agreed to surrender his rights to the government in or over such land and on payment of such compensation as provided in the Land Acquisition Act of 1894. What does that mean? It means collector can still acquire that land given that an agreement has been made between the owner and the government. So that the government is essentially buying that land from that owner by giving him or her adequate compensation according to the Land Acquisitions Act of 1894. Land Acquisitions Act of 1894 basically determines the proper compensations, etc., and the procedure on how to acquire a land from in this case, a private person. So when the government acquires that land, the government has to properly compensate it. Okay, according to this act. So this is the second option for collector. And the third one, allow in consultation with the chief wildlife warden the continuation of any right of any person in or over any land within the limits of the sanctuary. That is the third option. The land remains with that person, but in this particular case, he or she will be allowed to continue his or her natural life in the said land with the permission from chief wildlife warden. So after consulting with the chief wildlife warden, the collector may allow these personnel to continue their rights within the boundaries of sanctuary or national park. So these are the three options in front of the collector, and he could choose either of these or any of these based on the best possible outcome. Okay, so this is how the claim of rights are processed. Now, once this area has been made as a national park or sanctuary, what happens? Obviously, as I have said earlier, very high strict restrictions are imposed. Correct? One of the most important methods of restriction is to prevent entry into the protected area. The entry to this area is very highly regulated. Okay, so no person other than the following people shall enter or reside in these areas except in accordance with the conditions of a permit granted. So if you want, in general, if some private person want to enter this land, say for tourism or say just to do some research activities, whatever, he or she has to expressly get a permit from the authorities. Only then can he or she get go enter this land. Otherwise, it will be trespass. Otherwise, legally you can be punished. Okay, so without this permit, who all can enter the protected area? A public servant on duty. Okay, if you become IFS officers, Indian Forest Service, okay, IFS officer, I mean, you basically you have to enter. It's your duty to protect these areas and all, correct? So public servant on duty, such similarly other officers associated with forest rangers and all. Okay, then person who has been permitted by the chief wildlife warden or the authorized officer to reside within the limits of sanctuary or national park. Earlier I told you that is the third criteria. The collector may allow some people to reside in there. So such people can enter and live without any kind of permit. A person who has any right over immovable property within the limits. So he or she may not be residing inside the national park, but he or she might have some immovable property within the boundaries of that national park or sanctuary. That's possible. Correct. He or she might be living somewhere else, but still he or she might own a piece of land which is inside the sanctuary or national park. So such people can enter without a permit. A person passing through the sanctuary or national park along a public highway. This also sometimes happens. A national highway or a state highway might actually be passing through this national park, in between this national park. So at that time, for the smooth traffic, you cannot say that, you have to get a permit and all. No. So if that person is passing through using this public highway, then you need not have a permit. And finally, the dependents of the persons referred to in clause A, B, or C. These three. Okay, dependents means what? His children, or say his wife, or say her husband, her children. All the dependents as per the law. Okay, whoever these dependents are, they also have all the same rights. Clear? So these are the restrictions on entry into the national park area or say wildlife sanctuary. It depends. Okay, I mean, it depends on what kind of protection it is. Sometimes total ban is there. I told you earlier, it is varying according to area and all. Some minor variations might be there, but these are the general statutory clauses. Now, grant of permit for entry. I told you this grant is actually done by Chief Wildlife Warden. He is the authority in all these cases. So the Chief Wildlife Warden may, on application, grant to any person a permit to enter or reside in a sanctuary or a national park for all or any of the following purposes. So what are these purposes? For what all could the wildlife warden actually grant this application, grant this permit? First of all, investigation or study of wildlife and purposes ancillary or incidental thereto. Okay, so researchers and all are there. I mean, they have to study wildlife and all. All these things. For such things, it's allowed. Educational purposes. Photography. Wildlife photography is very huge. Also, you will have to have photographs of newly found species and all these things. Correct. So that is another thing. Scientific research. This can be clubbed with the first one. Tourism. In certain cases. Okay, tourism is not allowed everywhere in the park, but in some areas, tourism is allowed. Safari and all, you have heard about it. Transaction of lawful business with any person residing in the sanctuary. That's also possible. There are some people who might be residing within the sanctuary. So to have some lawful transaction business with those people, such person can also enter after getting a permit. Correct? So in all these cases, the Chief Wildlife Warden shall be the authority to control, manage and maintain protected areas. Okay, and the National Board for Wildlife may make recommendations on the setting up of and management of national parks, sanctuaries and other protected areas and on matters relating to restriction activities in these areas. As I have mentioned earlier, the National Board of Wildlife, once these sanctuaries and national parks are set up, it is up to this body, NBWL. Without its consent, you cannot change or alter the boundaries of this area, this protected area, and they have a very high power in making recommendations and managing these areas. The State Board for Wildlife, just as the National Board for Wildlife, there is a State Board also. The State Board can make recommendations to the state government on the selection and management of areas to be declared as protected areas. Okay, so SBCWL, they have the power to look into these areas and they have the power to recommend to the state government in selection and management of the said areas. Clear? So these are the three, two prominent methods of conservation of nature in India: wildlife sanctuaries and national parks. We have all heard about a lot of wildlife sanctuaries and national parks, but we may not have known what exactly is the provisions or what are the restrictions or the methods of protection in these areas. Okay, so we have looked into all that, the legal areas and all right now. Now, apart from these national parks and wildlife sanctuaries, there are a couple of other things or other areas or other designations for protecting the environment. First of all, conservation reserve, and then community reserve. Okay, so amendments have been made into the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972 in 2003. Okay, this act has undergone several amendments, and an amendment was brought in 2003 providing mechanism for a conservation reserve and a community reserve. Basically, the idea is to involve the community and to encourage the community initiated efforts in protecting wildlife. Okay, so let's look at it one by one. What are conservation reserves? Basically, these are areas owned by the state government. And these are adjacent to the national parks and sanctuaries for, say, protecting of landscape, seascape, habitat, whatever it is. All right. I mean, you can't say that if this is the national park or say wildlife sanctuary, whatever it is, you can't say that right outside this point it is heavy city. No, that is not possible. Some sort of a buffer would be very much welcome, correct? So there could be rural people and all living in these boundary regions and all. So with their help, it is possible to protect the the borders of these areas, correct? A buffer zone. I'm not talking about the buffer zone within a national park. That is there. We will look into that later. But I'm talking about a piece of land that is outside the national park, completely outside the national park or wildlife sanctuary. Okay, and such areas completely owned by the state government are known as conservation reserves, and these are managed by Conservation Reserve Management Committee. Okay, so state government, after having consultation with the local people there, declare an area owned by the government as a conservation reserve. That is very important. That area is owned by the government, not someone else. And the first conservation reserve in India was Tirupathy Marattur in Tirunelveli district of Tamil Nadu. This is the first conservation reserve in India. Now, similar to conservation reserves, we have community reserves. What is a community reserve? Same ideology. The state government may notify any community land or private land as a community reserve, provided that the members of the community or individuals concerned are agreeable to offer such areas for protection of flora and fauna, as well as their traditions, culture, and practices. So, what's the difference? Earlier, in conservation reserves, the area is owned by the state government. It is a public land. But in community reserve, that area is owned by the community or private individuals or private bodies. Got it? So, after getting the consent from the private owners or the community, the government can initiate processes for community reserve. That is the difference between conservation reserve and community reserve. Clear? And here also, there is a community reserve management committee that actually looks into protection of this area. All right. So the state government may, where the community or an individual has volunteered to conserve wildlife and its habitat, declare the area by notification as community reserve. So if the people are volunteering for its protection and volunteering to convert their land into a community reserve, then the state government can allow that. But no change in land use pattern shall be made within the community reserve except in accordance with the resolution passed by the management committee and approval of the same by state government. Once it is declared as a community reserve, it is not possible to change the land use pattern within that area. You can't completely change the land use pattern. For example, all of a sudden, once it is a community reserve, you cannot, cut down, say, a patch of the forest and convert that into agricultural land. You can't do that unless it is approved by the Community Reserve Management Committee and by the state government. A resolution has to be passed by this management committee and that has to be approved by the state government. Only then can you initiate any land use change within the boundaries of community reserve. Okay, so national park, wildlife sanctuary, conservation reserve and community reserve. What comes next? We talked about forests and the adjacent regions. Now, coastal areas, coastal protected areas. So, according to the IUCN, okay, International Union for Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, IUCN, this is the body that prepares all the list, red data book and all. So, according to IUCN, marine protected area or MPA is defined as any area of intertidal or subtidal terrain, together with its overlying water and associated flora, fauna, historical and cultural features, which has been reserved by law or other effective means to protect part or all of the enclosed environment. So basically, any area of intertidal or subtidal terrain, so entire coastal region, together with overlying water and the animals and plants, the whole thing, okay, is basically considered as a marine protected area, as after it has been given a particular statutory backing and all, just like national park and sanctuaries. Okay, and MPA in marine environment in India is classified into 3 categories. I know that it is a bit small and may not actually be visible for you to read. Sorry for that, but I will upload this slide in the Telegram channel. You can download it and read it from there. So marine protected areas in the India is actually classified into 3. Category 1, Category 2, Category 3A and B. So in the third category, there are 2 subdivisions. So what is in Category 1? Category 1 covers national parks and sanctuaries and having entire areas in the intertidal or subtidal or mangroves, coral reefs, creeks, seagrass beds, algal beds, estuaries and lagoons. So everything that we studied in the previous classes where I mentioned the importance of such ecosystems, all that comes under Category 1, granted very high levels of protection. Category 2 includes islands which have major part in marine ecosystem and some part in terrestrial ecosystem. So islands come under Category 2. Category 3A, sandy beaches beyond intertidal line but occasionally interacting with the seawater. Okay, intertidal line means what? There is a high tide and a low tide, correct? So that line, that is the intertidal area. Beyond that, up to where the seawater can influence is the Category 3A, occasionally influence. And Category 3B, evergreen or semi-evergreen forests of islands. Okay, so these are the sub-classifications of marine protected areas within India. In India, the marine protected areas comprises of 33 national parks and wildlife sanctuaries under the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Okay, but that does not mean there are 33 marine protected areas in India. There are only 31 marine protected areas in India. Why? Because in 2 cases, such as the Marine National Park and Marine Sanctuary in Gulf of Kutch, that is taken as 1, and Bhitarkaniga National Park and Bhitarkaniga Sanctuary are also taken as 1. And because of that, although there are 33 national parks within the MPA zone, there are only 31 MPAs as such. Understood the difference? Because these 2 are clubbed. The Marine National Park and Sanctuary of Gulf of Kutch is taken as 1. Similarly, Bhitarkaniga National Park and sanctuaries are taken as 1. Okay, so this is about coastal protected areas. Now coming to sacred groves. I think you all know what a sacred grove is. We have already covered this in the terrestrial ecosystem chapter. Same thing, nothing more. I hope you remember this is basically a revision for that. So sacred groves comprises of patches of forest or natural vegetation. Sometimes it's a few trees, sometimes it's a very pristine forest. Correct? Often associated with local folk deities. Okay, you have heard about the groves and all, which are very important for snake worship or say tree worship and all. So basically, it is associated with local force and tribal deities, etc., etc. Okay, so because of this, faith and belief and all, thus these spaces are actually protected by the local communities itself. Okay, because of these religious beliefs and traditional rituals, etc., etc. So in India, classification of sacred groves are as follows. First of all, traditional sacred groves, basically consisting of everything that I just mentioned. Okay, local, the village deity is worshipped there, represented in an elementary symbol and all. Second one is temple grove. Here, the grove is actually created around a temple. Okay, it's not a grove as such, but it is associated with a temple. There are plenty of examples in India. Even in Kerala, there are lots and lots of them. Okay, then groves around the burial or cremation grounds. That also happens sometimes. That is another faith. You know what a cremation ground is, correct? Burial site and all. So there are groves that is associated with that also. So these are how sacred groves are classified in India. What are their significance? Conservation of biodiversity. Yeah. Recharge of aquifers. Yes. Often sacred groves are associated with a pond. Okay, just like temples have a temple pond, usually these sacred groves have a pond associated with them. Similarly, soil conservation. Basically, environment and ecology conservation. Okay, so very, very important for ecological and environmental perspective. So in India, despite all these, the sacred groves are undergoing lots of threats. What are the chief threats? Disappearance of traditional beliefs. Yeah. I mean, a lot of beliefs are taken as superstitions. I mean, maybe most of them are. But still, these beliefs were the things that are, that were keeping these sacred groves intact. And when these beliefs are gone, obviously, the amount of protection given to these sacred groves are also gone. Okay, nobody cares about it as much anymore. That is one. Two, rapid urbanization and commercial forestry. Yeah. Sanskritization or transformation of the primitive forms of nature worship into formal temple worship. Yes, another issue. Sanskritization. What is Sanskritization? If you have been in my history classes, you should know what Sanskritization is. Basically, these tribal rituals and beliefs, etc., are Brahmanized. Okay, and instead of putting that area as such based on tribal beliefs and folk, that area is converted into a temple, and Sanskritized rituals are brought in. Okay, so that is what is known as Sanskritization. This is also threatening sacred groves. Invasion by exotic weeds. Yes, we talked about invasive species in the previous class. I hope you remember. Such species can also destroy the local native fauna and flora of this region. Increasing livestock and fuel wood collection. Yeah. Collecting minor forest produce and allowing these livestock animals to graze into these lands. All these could threaten the existence of sacred groves. Okay, so that is another topic, sacred groves. Now, our main topic today is the general umbrella topic is protected area networks, correct? PAN. When we talk about protection, we also have to talk about protection from unauthorized exchange or unauthorized selling or buying of such very, very important goods. Correct? So some of the forest producers are strictly banned or regulated from commercial selling or buying. Okay, so in certain cases, the exporters will not be given an export license if that good is among the prohibited category. Okay, so what are the items within the prohibited category in flora and fauna that will not get an export license? They are as follows. Okay, this is a long list and it is very small, so I'm pretty sure that you are not able to read it. Sorry for that, but I will simply read through them, and once I upload it, you can again download it and go through that. So all animals, all wild animals, animal articles, including their products and derivatives, excluding those for which ownership certificates has been granted, and also those required for transaction for education, scientific research and management under Wildlife Protection Act 1972, including their parts and products. So basically, all wild animals and their articles, their products, their derivatives. For example, the antlers of deers and stags. Similarly, the horns of rhinoceros and that of elephant. All these comes under prohibited items. So unless there is a license granted, a private license, okay, so there is a very good chance that a private personnel might be the owner of that. There has been plenty of kingdoms and all, right, in the past and all. So based through ancestral succession, these people could have inherited some elephant horns or say such things. So except in such cases, or except in cases for educational and research purposes, according to the Wildlife Act of 1972, any trade of wild animals or animal articles are prohibited. Okay, similarly, beef of cows, oxen and calf. Beef in the form of offal of cows, oxen and calf. Meat of buffalo, both male and female, fresh and chilled and frozen. Peacock tail feathers and its handicrafts and articles. Then shavings and manufactured articles of shavings of shed, antlers of cheetal and sambar. Seashells, wood and wood products, fuel wood, wood charcoal. Sandalwood in any form, excluding finished handicraft products of sandalwood, machine finished sandalwood products, sandalwood oil, etc. Red sanders wood, value added products of red sanders. Mechanical, chemical and semi-chemical wood pulp. So these are the prohibited. Don't worry about it. It's a huge list. Just remember a couple of them to write in essays or mains answer writing. That's all. So basically, any and all wildlife animals are in the prohibited category and their derivatives. Okay, unless the trade is happening as per the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Clear? Otherwise, you need specific licenses and specific permissions, etc., etc. Now, so far what we have talked about are the national initiatives. Now coming to global initiatives. Okay, internationally also there are certain systems intact for the protection of flora and fauna. First of all, the Man and Biosphere Program, MAB. This is an intergovernmental scientific program aiming to set a scientific basis for the improvement of relationship between people and environment. Okay, so the idea is to create a healthy relationship between people and environment. Avoid conflict between people and environment. Yesterday I talked about that, MAB. We talked about man and animal conflict, especially in the border areas of forests, correct? I hope you remember. So in order to avoid all that and to promote a good relationship between man and environment globally, this was launched in 1970s. Okay, and the agenda of the MAB program is actually defined by its governing body. So what is the governing body of MAB? It is International Coordination Council, ICC. Okay, you have heard about the other ICC, that is the International Cricket Council. But this is another ICC, International Coordinating Council, which is the governing body of Man and Biosphere Program. Okay, now, although this is the governing body, MAB relies on World Network of Biosphere Reserves for the ground zero implementation. The implementation arm of MAB is basically the World Network of Biosphere Reserves. MAB relies on this. Coordination is done by ICC. Got it? So what does this do? This basically predicts the consequences of today's actions on tomorrow's world. Okay, and thereby increases the people's ability to efficiently manage natural resources for the well-being of both human populations and the environment. So every action that we do have an impact on the environment. It's the job of MAB, to predict what are the consequences of today's actions in tomorrow's world. And based on that, we have to adjust accordingly so that man and environment can coexist together with a healthy relationship. Okay, so now comes the concept of Biosphere Reserve. Biosphere Reserve, we have plenty of Biosphere Reserves in India. We have already heard about that, studied about that, etc. earlier, especially in our schools and all. But Biosphere Reserve is not an Indian invention. It is actually a international, it's actually brought out by an international organization, UNESCO. Okay, so Biosphere Reserve is not an alternative for national park or a wildlife sanctuary. First of all, understand that. Okay, sometimes a national park or a wildlife sanctuary can be within a Biosphere Reserve. But even if it is within a Biosphere Reserve, National Park and Wildlife Sanctuary will have its own strict protection measures. All the laws associated with the National Park and Biosphere Reserve will be as such, National Park and Wildlife Sanctuary will be as such, even if they are a part of a Biosphere Reserve. Clear? So what exactly is this Biosphere Reserve? This International Coordination Council of UNESCO in November 1971 introduced this designation called Biosphere Reserve for natural areas. And this was refined by a task force of United Nations, UNESCO's MAB program in 1974. And the Biosphere Network was formally launched in 1976. Okay, so Biosphere Reserve was actually launched in 1976. The final version of Biosphere Reserve was launched in 1976, although the initial designation came into operation since 1971. That initial designation was introduced 5 years before it was formally launched. And accordingly, a Biosphere Reserve is an international designation by UNESCO for representative parts of nature and cultural landscapes, extending over large area of terrestrial or coastal marine ecosystems or a combination of thereof. So basically, UNESCO gives this Biosphere Reserve to such areas having natural and cultural landscapes, extending over large areas of terrestrial, coastal or marine ecosystems or a combination of that. A very vague definition. Could be anything. Correct? It's not a very specific definition or anything. It's pretty vague. But it's not that vague because there are a lot of criteria associated with it, which we will be looking into in the upcoming slide. Okay, there are 10 criteria. If any of these sites fit into any of those, then such sites could be granted the tag, Biosphere Reserve tag. But we will look into that later. Biosphere reserves are special environments for both people and nature. Okay, so these are living examples of how man and nature can together coexist. Okay, so these are actually established by countries only. Correct. These are all these natural areas are part of some countries. And because every country in this world is a sovereign country, because they have sovereignty, some international body cannot dictate terms within that country. So ultimately, these sites are established by that country, but later recognized by UNESCO's Man and Biosphere Program. And once that recognition is got, it becomes a Biosphere Reserve. So what are the characteristics of a Biosphere Reserve? So these are protected areas of land or coastal environment wherein people are an integral component of the system. Correct. So the Biosphere Reserves includes one or more of the following categories. First one, they are representative examples of natural biomes. 2. Conserve unique communities of biodiversity or areas with unusual natural features of exceptional interests. 3. Harmonious landscapes resulting from traditional patterns of land use. Okay, some traditional patterns of land use, these are very much, helpful for the environment. Sacred groves and all comes under this category. Okay, modified or degraded ecosystems capable of being restored to more natural conditions. Have a non-manipulative core area in a combination with areas in which baseline measurements, experimental and manipulative research, education and training is carried out. So areas having a very pristine core area where no activity is allowed, surrounded by some buffer area and transition areas. So if a site falls under any of these, then such an area could be a biosphere reserve. What are its functions? Functions are very simple, very much vague, very general. You can write it down yourself. Encourage the conservation of landscapes, ecosystems, etc. Encourage the traditional resources of the resource use of that systems. Understand the patterns and process of functions of ecosystem. Monitor the natural and human caused changes of spatial and temporal scales. So all these are very vague points. Everything you can put down yourself. There's no need to by heart any of these. Think about the functions of why should you conserve environment. All right, and write that down. That's it. I'm not going to read through all the points because these are very general. Okay, now, just like we have this international biosphere reserves, this under UNESCO, we have something known as National Biosphere Reserve Program, NBRP. This was initiated in the year 1986 to ensure that local community is actively participating in the efficient management of ecosystem. And while they help in managing the ecosystem, they also will be getting help for improving their livelihood, etc., etc. I told you all this comes under MAB, man and biosphere. So both ecosystem and people are being benefited. This is a symbiotic relationship. Okay, so what are the objectives of National Biosphere Reserve Program? Again, very simple, very vague. To conserve the diversity and integrity of plants, animals within the natural ecosystem, safeguard genetic diversity of species, etc., etc. To provide areas of multifaceted research and monitoring, facilities for education and training, ensure sustainable use of natural resources. You know the points. So why should you conserve nature? Write it down. That's it. Okay, now, what are the criteria for selection of biosphere reserves? This was actually laid down by the core group of experts. Okay, this is the body that lays down the criteria for selection of a site as a biosphere reserve. Okay, and this was done in 1979. There are a couple of primary criteria and then there are a couple of secondary criteria. Primary criteria are must. Secondary criteria can be tampered with, manipulated. What are primary criteria? First one, a site that must contain an efficiently protected and minimally disturbed core area of value of nature conservation and should include additional land and water suitable for research and demonstration of sustainable methods of research and management. So it should have a central core area which should be efficiently protected and minimally disturbed. And along with that, it should have some additional land and water suitable for, say, other scientific studies and etc., etc. This is a must criteria. Second one, the core area should be typical of a biogeographical unit and large enough to sustain viable populations representing all trophic levels of ecosystem. So this core area should be a very typical example of a biogeographical unit. It should have everything to sustain viable populations of all tropical levels, which means what? Everything. It should have producers, consumers, that means primary, secondary, tertiary, etc., etc., and the ultimate predator. Okay, so that should be a minimally disturbed area with high amount of protection that is itself a typical biogeographical unit having all tropical levels of ecosystem. only then can that area be designated as a biosphere reserve. You can't designate it as a BRS and go, cutting down trees inside that. These are the primary criteria. Now, secondary criteria. Areas having rare and endangered species. Yes, even if the above criteria are not, above criteria are a must, but along with that, these criteria can also be added up. Areas having rare and endangered species. Areas having diversity of soil and microclimatic conditions and indigenous varieties of biota. That could happen, correct? Some species might be seen only in some particular region. It could be indigenous to that area. Okay, Western Ghats, Himalayan foothills, etc. are very good examples of that. Areas potential for preservation of traditional tribal or rural modes of living. Another example. Correct. Say for example in India, in the Andaman Nicobar Islands, we have the Sentinelese tribe and all, which are these tribes are very distant from the major population of India, and they live in their own ways. Okay, their own laws, they are like basically people who were there 10,000 years ago, and we do not interfere with their lives. Why? Because that is something that we have to protect. That traditional tribal values, etc. has to be conserved. We can't see that anywhere else in the world. Such parts are there in many places, including India. I just gave you one example. There are plenty of such examples in India where traditional tribal knowledge and modes of life are preserved as much as possible. So these are secondary criteria. Okay, so I mentioned that Biosphere Reserve has to have some core region and then a zone adjacent to that, etc., etc. So how does a Biosphere Reserve look precisely? First of all, you have a core zone. Okay, the core zone is the area where activity is very, very, very highly limited, and as I have mentioned earlier, it should not be tampered with at all. High levels of protection. Okay, this core zone secures legal protection and management, and research activities that do not affect natural life process are allowed. Even here, research activities are allowed only if it does not in any way hamper the natural life process there. And this area must contain suitable habitat for numerous plants and animals, including higher order predators, and must contain centers of endemism. As I have mentioned earlier, it should have everything, every layer of every levels of tropical levels. It should have producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary, and the ultimate predator. Everything should be there, and it should be having maximum protection with minimal tamperment. And this core zone is kept free from all human pressures external to the system. Only very limited research activity is allowed, and given that research activity will in no way tamper with the natural process of that ecosystem. So that is the core zone. Outside the core zone, you have the buffer zone. Okay, so this basically surrounds the core zone, and here some uses and activities are allowed. And say for example, some limited resource extraction, limited recreation, tourism, fishing, grazing. Okay, so as long as this doesn't affect the core zone, it is allowed in the buffer zone in a very regulated fashion. Research and educational activities are also allowed. So this is a buffer. Okay, this is a buffer area to protect the core zone. Got it? With regulated activities and all. And after that, you have transition zone. This is the outermost part. In this transition zone, even settlement is allowed. Settlement is allowed. Crop is allowed. You can have agricultural lands in the transition area. Okay, but idea is that here the buffer zone itself is protected. And after the outside the transition zone, you have the normal life, the city life, or whatever it is. Correct. So basically this transition zone is that transition from that, our city type of life into a forest life. And then you have the buffer zone, the sole idea to give as much protection as possible to the core zone. Okay, so very high regulations, very strict measures. And in the core zone, minimal human activity, minimal disturbance, only research activities that does not in any way interfere with the natural life processes is allowed. Okay, so these are the 3 different zones in a biosphere reserve. I hope you understood. So biosphere reserves differ from protected areas due to their emphasis on certain things. Okay, what is the difference between biosphere reserve and other protected areas such as national parks and wildlife sanctuaries, etc., etc.? First of all, conservation of overall biodiversity and landscape rather than some specific flagship species. That is one. Biosphere reserve is a huge area compared to a wildlife sanctuary or a national park. And in case of national park, I told you the entire ecology is protected, but it is, in that comparatively smaller region. And in case of wildlife sanctuary, it is sometimes, species specific. But a biosphere reserve is not like that. It takes the entire gamut of environment, that huge region as such within its ambit. Okay, second one. Different components of biosphere reserves like landscapes, habitats, and species and land races. So when you talk about biosphere reserves, everything, individual things like these are taken into concern. Landscape, habitat, species, land races. So species is only one part of a biosphere reserve. As far as sanctuary was concerned, species was the focus of conservation. Okay, then developmental activities and resolution or mitigation of conflicts between development and conservation. These biosphere reserves have 3 different zones, and in each zone, limited amount of activity is allowed. And as you move to the core zone, the activity is more and more regulated and etc., etc. Unlike a national park or a wildlife sanctuary. Then increase in broad basings of stakeholders, especially local people's participation and their training compared to the features of schemes on wildlife sanctuaries and national parks. Here also local community can be taken into concern. Also, you can have broad-based stakeholders. We can bring in other, stakeholders also to protect such vast ecosystem. Obviously, you have to have your, the local community to give it the best methods, best kind of protection. But other stakeholders are also welcome. Sustainable environment-friendly development and sustained coordination amongst different developmental organizations and agencies. Research and monitoring to understand the structure and functioning of ecological system and their modes of reaction when exposed to human intervention. So basically, biosphere reserves are a part of MAB, Man and Biosphere Program. So that is the umbrella idea. Correct. So human-nature interaction. You have to monitor that and study on that. That is the most important aim of it. Okay. Now we are looking into another topic called the World Network of Biosphere Reserves. Earlier I told you the ICC is the coordination agency of MAB program, but the ground zero activities or the implementation is done with the help of World Network of Biosphere Reserves. Correct? So what exactly do this WNBR do, and how does it conserve the biosphere reserves? Biosphere reserves remain under the sole sovereignty of the concerned country or state where it is situated, and the participation in the world network is voluntary. First of all, keep that in mind. If there is a biosphere reserve in India, it does not mean that that territory is now a part of United Nations. No. That is India's own territory, but that the international agency will help in protecting that area. That's all, provided India satisfies some criteria. Got it? Now, delisting from international network is done as an exception on ground of violation of obligation for conservation and sustainable development of biosphere reserves after consulting the concerned government. Sometimes that also could happen. Even if it is taken into the list of biosphere reserves, sometimes it can be kicked out. Such things have happened, especially in cases where the government does not meet some criteria, or the conservation of that site is not given adequate importance as it should get. Okay, so very recently in the World Heritage List, if you remember, Liverpool was kicked out of the World Heritage List by UNESCO. Okay, that's a different one, not Biosphere Reserve, but Liverpool was kicked out. Why? Because some of the activities that was done in the Liverpool in that area that destroyed those elements which brought Liverpool its World Heritage status. Okay, same goes to conservation of biosphere reserves also. There are certain factors that got this site into the list. If these factors are not adequately taken care of or conserved, then you will get kicked out. Clear? So the MAB program's primary achievement is the creation of the 1977 of the World Network of Biosphere Reserve. So MAB, that is the main achievement of Man and Biosphere Program, creation of WNBR. So basically this WNBR of MAB program promotes North-South and South-South collaboration and represents a unique tool for international cooperation through sharing knowledge, exchanging experiences, building capacity, and promoting best practices. So basically this is a kind of soft diplomacy. This is a method of coordination between all the different countries across the globe. Okay, I mean, these are protecting environment and protecting a particular species. These are topics where usually nobody voice come up with opposing voices. Okay, so these are areas of cooperation with all countries, thereby protecting and promoting international cooperation. Last topic, biodiversity hotspots. Okay, I mean, we have some subtopics in this, but this is the last main topic. What exactly is a biodiversity hotspot? This term was actually coined by a person named as Norman Mayers. I think you have heard about this. You should have studied this in your Environment and Ecology in high school. Norman Mayers came up with this term called Biodiversity Hotspot in 1988. Any site that satisfies two very strict criteria comes under biodiversity hotspots. First of all, species endemism. That area must contain at least 1,500 species of vascular plants as endemics. That is 0.5%, greater than 0.5% of the total in the world should be there in that area as endemics, which means it should not be anywhere else in the world. It should be endemic to that region. Species endemism, that is one. 2, degree of threat. It has to have lost at least 70% of its original habitat. If these two criteria are satisfied, then it is a biodiversity hotspot. Okay, and among these biodiversity hotspots, there are certain sites which should have even more levels of conservation. These are known as the hottest hotspots. And these are selected based on 5 factors. Okay, within these biodiversity hotspots, hottest hotspots are selected based on 5 key factors, which are the endemic plants, endemic vertebrates, endemic plants per area ratio, endemic vertebrates per area ratio, remaining primary vegetation as percentage of original extent. These are the 5 factors, not that much important, but just understand. Endemic plants, endemic vertebrates. Then density of endemic plants and density of endemic vertebrates. Finally, remaining primary vegetation as a percentage of the original vegetation. Based on these 5 factors, in the world, there are 8 hottest hotspots. These are Madagascar, Philippines, Sundaland, Brazil's Atlantic forest, Caribbean, Indo-Burma, Western Ghats, and Sri Lanka together, Eastern Arc and coastal forests of Tanzania or Kenya. These are the 8 hottest of hotspots in the world. Okay, among these hotspots, there are 4 in India. The 4 biodiversity hotspots, okay, not hottest of hotspots, but the 4 biodiversity hotspots are there in India. They are, first of all, Eastern Himalayas. I'm not going to read this. This is basically the extent of that region. Okay, so Eastern Himalayas, you already know what I'm talking about. The the northeastern part of India, the north and northeast of India. Then Indo-Burma, India, Myanmar area, again the northeastern states, that region. Western Ghats and Sri Lanka, the Sahyadri Hills and entire Western Ghats region and Sri Lanka portion. And Sundaland. Sundaland is basically in India, Sundaland is the Nicobar group of islands. So these are the 4 areas in India that are biodiversity hotspots. Okay, you can read it in your own time if you want a better understanding of the region that we are talking about. But I think when I say Western Ghats, you already know the area that I'm talking about. Okay, so no need for further detailing. Biodiversity cold spots. We talked about hotspots. So what is the cold spot? Just the opposite. Areas that have relatively low biodiversity but are also experiencing a high rate of habitat loss. That is a biodiversity cold spot. So the species richness is very, very, very low. But that doesn't mean that that area does not deserve any protection. Maybe that area could have only one species, but that species could be in the verge of extinction. In that case, you have to protect that area anyway. Correct? So such areas are known as biodiversity cold spots. Very low species richness, but experiencing high rate of habitat loss and must be protected. Okay, now comes World Heritage Sites. World Heritage Site status is given by UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. Okay, so this is a list prepared by UNESCO and it gives this tag based on 3 factors: culture, natural and mixed. There are cultural sites, there are natural sites and there are mixed sites. Okay, study the sites from India. Very, very important. Study all of them. Don't skip any. There is only one mixed site and that is, which is the only mixed World Heritage Site from India. Anyone? Go find that out. Okay, I'm not going to tell you everything. Go find that out on your own time. Only one site is there in the mixed category. Okay, so the sites are designated as having outstanding universal value. Very, very important point. Outstanding universal value under the convention concerning the protection of world cultural and natural heritage. So the convention was adopted by UNESCO in 1972, enforced in 1975, provides the framework for international cooperation in preserving and protecting cultural treasures and natural areas throughout the world. And the first list of world heritage was published in 1978. So I told you there are cultural, natural and mixed sites. Among these, the natural heritage sites are as follows. Natural heritage sites are restricted to those natural areas that furnish outstanding examples of Earth's record of life or its geological process. Okay? Provide excellent examples of ongoing ecological or biological evolutionary process. Contain natural phenomena that are rare, unique, superlative, or of outstanding beauty. Or furnish habitats of rare endangered animals or plants or are sites of exceptional biodiversity. If it fits into any of these 4 categories, then that is a natural heritage site. Clear? Moving on. This is the criteria. I'm not going to read it. Don't worry about it. It's very small. You can't read it either. I will upload it at that time. You can read it. So these are basically I copy pasted the exact same thing from the UNESCO website. You can get the exact same things from there also. Basically, until 2004, there were 6 criteria for cultural heritage and 4 for natural heritage. Okay, but in the year 2005, this was modified so that there is only one set of 10 criteria. Okay, so nominated sites must have outstanding universal value and must meet at least one of the 10 criteria. And these are the 10 criteria. Go through that in your own time. The last 4 are based on natural values, natural heritage sites, and the others are based on cultural heritage sites. Okay, you can go through it in your own time, read it, understand it, so that you will have an idea on which all sites will become or have the potential to become a natural heritage site and a cultural heritage site or a mixed site. Okay. So, International Year of Biodiversity. This is another initiative from the side of United Nations. United Nations declared the year 2010 to be the year of International Year of Biodiversity. And basically, it is a celebration of the life of Earth and the value of biodiversity for our lives. Okay, and United Nations proclaimed May 22nd as the International Day of Biodiversity. Just keep that in mind, some extra points, that's all, nothing more. International Day of Biodiversity is May 22nd. Okay, this may not be exactly useful for UPSC, but this is very useful for your PSC and other exams. Dates. Okay, it is May 22nd. All right, so with that, I think we will wind it up for today. I hope you understood what I was trying to convey in today's chapter. Basically, we talked about protected area networks, different kinds of protection, both national and international initiatives, and how to be a part of the Biosphere Reserves and how you get kicked out, and so and so. So thank you for joining. Please like this video, share with your friends, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done that. We will meet again tomorrow with another chapter. Until then, bye bye. Good night.